There were once two kingdoms, one in the mountains, the other in the valley below, who seemed to stay in a constant state of low-level conflict, and between whom communications apparently ranged from scant to non-existent. But unbeknownst to either side was the existence of a third principality situated halfway up the mountains from the valley. Some animals once discovered some books in the jungle and eventually developed the ability to read them. And they were most intrigued by the ideas they found regarding emotions and discussed amongst themselves what these strange things might be. But after only a short while of their reading and discussing, they no longer had to wonder what they were. They began having them. Once upon a time, soon after man was created, the first nascent hero appeared, and for a while made tremendous strides, but was eventually struck down by his act of speaking. In the routine world of reality, yes, it is true. You can't have it both ways. That's why there is the realm of the hero. There is a myth concerning a warrior who gave up both of his eyes to the gods in exchange for the supreme wisdom. And such is still the requirement, although the word eyes is open to an alternative spelling. The advantage to believing that you are disabled due to individually directed afflictions is that it relieves you of having to consider making any actual effort. At a transcendental level, you can judge how non-physically ill an ordinary man is by how vigorously he insists he is so. I whine, therefore I am. I whine, and thereby am I certain that I feel. Heroism is not mere acquiescence to the inevitable, for to that do all men submit. But the true hero meets his fate clothed in an understanding that neither resists, complains, nor comments in any manner thereon. To the true heart, the noise of the incoming bullets is as annoying as the execution itself. Pretend I didn't do that. Part of the compensation for being simple and ordinary is in believing that you're most certainly otherwise. Part of the compensation for being simple and ordinary is in believing that you're most certainly otherwise. A father so advised his son, once you experience the secret for yourself, you'll instantly understand why all explanations of life are useless, meaningless, and in no wise correct. And the boy asked, then should I even now cease to bother myself with such? And the elder answered with the question, are you capable of doing that? There was once a man who possessed two animals, both of which were but partially tame. And while one of them silently threatened him physically, the other one would make noises and somehow make him feel bad. There are three types of guilt, two routine, the other not. One is the type you assume from others. Second is the type that comes with hormonal decline. And third is a non-standard type that arises only from one's own efforts at the heroic. They apologize most who imaginarily trip. A certain warrior so instructed his son, it's not enough for you not to talk about you, but you must also turn deaf to others doing so. And further note, a man's own thinking is his greatest source of such comment. There is no published standard by which a more conscious person should live. Each must discover his own, though they all turn out to be glaringly similar. The keen eye does not have to look to magic nor the explanations of magic to find the miraculous in life, but rather to the normally unnoticed patterns that are the very fabric of life. Molecular similarities produce wonder in the first degree. In his pondering of provincial wisdom, One man came to see a fresh interpretation of the axiom, "We are what we eat," to mean that men are what they think, and what they think is based on how they feel, and how they feel can sure have a lot to do with what they've recently had to eat. The older areas of man's nervous system seek acceptance and companionship, while the younger warrior on his own path pushes forward in solitude. A student of the law, in considering the history of vagrancy statutes, whereby established communities sought to keep out transients with no investment in local affairs who they considered undesirable, reflected on a similar situation within men's minds and how already accepted ideas resist the intrusion of new, especially footloose ones. One day one man announced to the whole world, "Quit your whining. To varying degrees, everyone feels bad." And several lions, eagles, and elephants knowingly nodded, saying, "Hey." What does a hero have to talk about but himself? And about whom is he less likely to do so? How would a fully realized hero come to have a hero? And why would one who knows the meaning of life seek any lesser knowledge? The hottest new conflict is between two architectural schools of philosophy. One which holds that only the penthouses are of significance and all lower floors worthy of little note, while the opposition claims that it is the bottom supporting levels that are of singular importance, for without them the higher stories could not even exist. Just as all would-be mystics long to find one who actually is, so too do those who don't know the secret believe that it exists without. The sensation of movement and travel. The ordinary can feel so through criticism and complaining. Once you realize the odds in the hero's game between the individual few and the collective many, you then understand the predictable condition of the warrior as recluse, a solitary figure within himself. One man named his emotions Thoughts Jr., only to be topped by his brother who named his thoughts Emotions Jr. Legend says there was once an extreme mystical order who believed that any talk was a form of whining. If a warrior gets in a spitting contest with anyone, he loses. In the great warfare, the supreme commander of the mystical forces knows not to put all his trust in the strength of the infantry, nor in the plans of his generals, but rather depends most on the intelligence provided by his own reconnaissance and reflection. Neither muscles nor knowledge alone a true army makes. The popular poser of which came first, the chicken or the egg, was unwittingly lifted by the ordinary from the mystery surrounding the connection between human thoughts and emotion. There is yet another myth concerning a warrior who, when he sought the knowledge of the secret from the gods, was given it, but in return they ripped out his tongue. When you can look at something and think, it's not exactly like this, and it's not exactly like that, you're beginning to properly explore the frontiers of thought's capacity. A wise ruler must be alert in all areas of his kingdom. That which makes man man resides not in his feet and arms, nor in his lungs and heart, but neither is it limited to his head and consciousness. An enlightened ruler is alert to all corners of his kingdom at all times. A certain king one day said to his son, "If you presently feel the need for a hero, after whom to pattern your life, look not to the philosophers nor to the generals, but to that noble dog you so dearly loved, and by whose grave you so often silently stand. On that long mysterious march, those warriors, the weakest, fall first by speech. Speech, the product of emotions uncontrolled. What I was going to speak about would in turn, sooner or later, if not very sooner, have referred to public aspects of, or me drawing a distinction between, I was probably going to say the mystical and the public mystical, always inferring that the commonly known mystical is not the full telling of the story, being at the least inference, which is always opens itself up to any reasonable person saying, well, why in the world, or what do you have in mind by that? If there is some secret behind it, what is it? And even an earlier question should be, that would be reasonable and should be of interest, is if it is true that the publicly known is not the actual statement of it, then what is the purpose? How did it come about that there's a publicly known and a lesser known? Or as I have also pointed out, that oftentimes I'll bring up religion and then compare it into what would, from a binary basis, apparently be compared in an unfavorable light to whatever it is I infer to as the real thing. And it's not an attack on religion any more than the comparison that I was going to draw between such terms as the mystical and that which is publicly known to be the mystical. How do you like it when even the intro is so convoluted? Well, maybe I underestimate you people. When I listen to me trying to describe the indescribable, at times I think, well, it's another case of attempted further descriptions do nothing but blow more smoke in somebody's face. The religion, and even the publicly known mystical, is man's general best attempt, or another way to put it, it's all that life allows to reach routine consciousness. But that does not mean that's all there is, but it does not mean that it's a failure on religion's part, or it does not mean that there is some kind of inherent flaw or a egregious mistake on those who support some publicly known form of mysticism. It's based upon, or one of the things it's based upon, is what I was getting into tonight, hence this unbelievably burdensome and clumsy intro. Let's try it the other way. Let me go ahead and say what give you the subject I was going to speak of, and then maybe perhaps back up or do a side step again to the intro. The public known forms of mysticism, religion, philosophy, speaks easily enough of man in two ways, of his physical life and his mental life. At the very least, although humanity normally would perhaps use other terms, but that leaves the other area of human emotions, about which very little seems to be said directly. To be more specific in the three possibilities I gave you, even if you get into the areas of what is commonly assumed to be mystical systems, the majority of them, the same as the majority of everything in life, the rest of life, is aimed at man's body. That you find apparently mystical efforts based upon physical rituals, disciplines, exercises, notwithstanding or not excluding a change in diet even, which is still aimed at the body. You have a lesser amount, but at least direct attempts at trying to apply some sort of discipline to man's thoughts, to his thinking, as a means to expand consciousness, as a means to put some sort of extraordinary shock into one's nervous system. If you get to the human emotions, there's nothing, even at the common level, extant so directly aimed thereto. The best that they come up with any sort of attempted work on human emotions is really charitable works. They will tell you, they will say to a man, you would be a better person, even in a potentially transcendental fashion, you would be a better person if you would refrain from overeating, if you would refrain from intaking alcohol, ingesting drugs, overdoing it in sex, eating the wrong foods, not getting enough exercise. They can say that, and whether you agree with it or not, the point is you can see precisely at what they're pointing. The inference being, the instructions being, but it's their belief, so they're inferring that it's true, that if you would make certain specific, identifiable changes in your physical life, it would lead to you being a better person, not a slimmer person, not just a more healthy person physically if you gave up smoking or drinking or crack, but that you, if you had such an interest, that you would become a better person somehow internally. They usually say spiritually. But you would become a better person beyond a simple increase in your degree of health. They can then also say that if a man brought his thoughts under control, if a man had could exercise some authority over the ramblings of his mind, and of course it's tied directly to speech, it would come out that they would say that a man should not be cursing, that a man should not be criticizing his neighbor, the man should not be voicing biased opinions about different people different from his culture, his race, his sex, his nationality, his religion. And that a man should, if he could at least curb his tongue, then he could apply his efforts to try and curb his thoughts, which gave rise to it. But if you ask, if we were dealing with someone who was trying to speak as an expert on mystical matters, and they'd covered all that and gave examples, which you must know your own, they range all the way from most common religions, and then into more specific areas, the Western interpretation of yoga, all the way from that, you could say, to the Zen disciplines. Just trying to give you a range of the commonly known that an ordinary expert on matters mystical could say, well, it goes all the way from the body, as you're describing, to such as physical yoga, and to Zen disciplines of a man attempting to bring his thoughts under some control. So he says that, and we go, well, I like that, I understand you, but how about the human emotions? What sort of, I'm just a student of this, what sort of activity has there been? What sort of history in the world of the mystical is there for direct attempts on human emotions? According to how fleet of foot they were mentally, how many seconds, pause it would take for them to come up with something, because there is nothing as directly, specifically identifiable. Within the bosom of all religions, within somewhere the context of all the known mystical systems, all the way from my spectrum, the range I gave you from physical disciplines to apparent direct effort and assault on uncontrollable thought, there in the middle they would go, well, now where that comes in is such things as charity, compassion for your fellow man. But if you insisted that, well, I want more than a theory about it, where is there some sort of attempted work done directly on the human emotions? Now, I could have thrown it to you and give you a few seconds for you to think of it, but there's not really one. Where it falls is charitable works. I could have described it somewhere else, but that is about the best they can do. That a man should be trying to help his fellow man. It is sort of this is not really the point I'm making, but it is somewhat of a backdoor approach that if you knew what you were doing and you couldn't find anything else, any other personal way in which to deal with emotions, you could undertake that, but it's not for the sake of doing good works and to piling up some reward with your Heavenly Father to please the gods by helping the downtrodden. what it would do is have an indirect effect to the kingdoms up in the mountains and the one down the valley below that seem so far removed from one another to attempt to do charitable work for which there is no good reason to do so, simply will, to the right sort of person that would do it if they had no other means, they would eventually, through an indirect process, would give the people up in the kingdoms in the mountains and the ones down the valley, at least give them an opportunity to realize that I can apparently involve myself in activities that have nothing to do with my own personal interest. That is, I'm attempting to help others, trying to look after their interest a certain few hours a week or a few hours a day at the expense of my own. And you do that long enough, and the burden, the imposition it places upon you, one day strikes you as this is an imposition that's actually no imposition. The difference in me looking after the apparent desires of others as opposed to looking after my own wants is indeed the poster boy for the slogan, a difference with no distinction. Because I spend my time a certain amount of hours, or I've tried to devote my life for the last few months or years to looking after other people rather than looking after my own wants, and it suddenly strikes me that it'll make a goddamn bit of difference. That for a period of months, perhaps a period of years, I emotionally struggle with this, which religious people, even those that do not believe that they're involved with any deeper mystical struggle within their religious life, even they pursuing that can eventually experience the feeling that I am looking after others at the expense of my own wants, and it at least shakes the foundation of the belief that what I have always thought that I wanted, if pushed far enough, seems to lose all significance. How about this? It can wear out your dreams, daydreams. It can wear out your imagination. No one knows how to approach it that way. If they were that smart, if they understood that much, they wouldn't have to do charitable work. Right? So I'm saving you years and years if you couldn't do it. But that is supposed to be, that is the ultimate possibility of what would happen if you had no other means, if you had no other approach to try and work on emotions. Now back to my intro. See if it makes any more sense. This is still not the focal point of what I was trying to get tonight. But still, why is it that there seems, or I say that there is the public form of mysticism, the public form of the pursuit of the secret, and then I infer or just say outright that that's not the real pursuit. And so someone could say, well, all right, it's a conspiracy, that those who know how to do it are involved with it, they're hiding it from the rest of us. Now, let me just do the byplay between me and this other person, this imaginary person. I say, no, that's not it. And just assume that they accept that as being a not disingenuous response, that they accept it. Okay, it's not a conspiracy. And they go, well, then why is it a secret? Here's why it's a secret. For the same reason that there is no direct way to work on one's emotions vis-a-vis or compared to the kinds of disciplines that you can apply to the body or to the mind. There's nothing you can directly say about it. That doesn't help. For a long period, considerable length of time, I have been talking about this sort of thing as an intellectual activity. I have certainly never spoken of it as a physical activity, other than to point out that the physical side of a man's life cannot be a detriment, or you're not going to get away. In other words, if you're an alcoholic, if you drink constantly, if you're on drugs, that sort of thing. It's just any halfway intelligent person should know that that is an absolute bar. Or if you don't know, then I'll tell you again. So there's very little to be said other than to children, to really weekend would-be mystical dilettantes about work on the body. Because there is no amount of exercise, there's no amount of change of diet, there's nothing physically you can do that's worth any more than 2 or 3 minutes of talking. The 30 seconds I just did is don't be killing yourself physically by degrees. And you should have no sense to know that. That's just a starting point. So that takes care of work on one's body. Great secret work, the great secret mystical work, as applied to one's body. First off, don't fuck around with your body. Don't screw up your body. Don't ruin your health. That's it. Took care of that. Now to the mind. Now, other than spend 30 seconds, I've spent a considerable length of time referring to the mind. But then there's an interesting question that eventually, and I've been slipping up on it the last several months. I didn't make any announcement about it. I was speaking about stress, and then several nights I brought up the amount of mail that I continue to get throughout the years. People who have read something I'd written or seen these or had seen me years ago, and their questions, the vast, vast majority of all correspondence and people, the correspondence, it ends up with a question, but the correspondence ends up with people literally whining. And out in the ordinary world, besides that, what are most civilized people's complaints based on? They normally refer to them as psychological problems. They oftentimes want to say mental problems, and they're not. They're not mental problems, not unless you have genetic brain damage, physical brain damage. They're not mental problems, they're something else. And that's usually where people back into the shadows. Well, I have certain psychological problems. And nowadays, everyone, any educated person will accept that. You can say, well, I'm not really psychotic, and I am not neurotic to the point of being incapacitated to live an ordinary life, but I do have, psychological problems, which any civilized, sane person nowadays will admit they have. We've been through this. For a man to say, no, I have no problems at all, everybody else is going to look at you like, I always thought you were a little weird. Because that's one of the proofs of sanity is to at least admit, well, yeah, I'm not free. I'm not totally free of psychological problems. I'm like everybody else. And everybody else goes, well, good. And they'll slap you on the back. They know you're okay. But are these problems actually mental? One more time, we are disregarding genetic brain damage. Is there such a thing as a mental problem? I don't know why I'm doing this dramatic stalling, because a minute ago I already pointed out there's not, but there's not. Your mind does not give you problems. For those of you who are interested in the physiology of man or medical science, why do you think that the brain has no feeling physically? Why do you think it is that once they can get you past them opening up your skull, that they can sit up there and play around and stick their fingers in your brain and stick electrodes and cut on it? And you can lay there in a local anesthetic, or none, after they get through the bone, and sit there and talk to them. Work a crossword puzzle. I guess some sane person watching this could say that's pretty far-fetched, but so what? I'm just going to say that there is a physical metaphor for the reality of what I'm talking about. There is no such thing as mental problems if you're able to think about it in a certain way. What is called mental or psychological problems, which are mental, is what people mean. That's what they think they mean, and oftentimes, like I said, they will even use that term, but it's more commonly all lumped under psychological problems. Where do they come from? What is it people are whining about? What is the stress that people feel in life? Now, an ordinary sophisticated man can say, well, the stress is mental. Or if they were really even city level hip, they could say, well, it's more complex than the way I'm putting it. They could say stress comes about, it's a combination of things, such as, and I'll start making them an example for a fictitious, reasonably sane, sophisticated person. They would say, well, for instance, my work. There is a great deal of stress on my job. And if I look down, I'm like, well, tell me more, how so? And they started giving me examples, and I'd say, well, how do you know that's stressful? They say, well, I have so much work to do. And I'd say, well, a ditch sticker has a lot of work to do. Yeah. A ditch sticker. And they could say, well, wait a minute, no. And I could say, do you realize how few people in the building trades are in analysis? Do you understand that there have been recent surveys, widespread surveys done, comprehensive surveys, and the percentage of those in the building trades that engage in physical labor for a living that they hardly show up. It's less than 1% show up compared to people in the professions, people, white-collar workers. And the man would say, assuming he was a white-collar person, he would say, yes, I don't doubt that. Again, assuming he was fairly sane, he would hear that. And if I just said, you realize there's hardly, you can't find one plumber or bricklayer or ditch digger in a million that says he has psychological problems on a test? I mean, just on a survey, they just ask him, he goes, well, no. And if I said that to this fictitious professional, ordinary person I'm talking to, at least white collar, he would not find that surprising. He'd go, he'd never thought about it, but he'd go, okay. And he'd say, but he doesn't have the same pressures as me. And I could go, okay, I accept that. It's a different job. He says, I'm in sales, or I'm in R&D with a software company, or at a research center, at a think tank, somewhere. And he could say, the pressures I have are not physical pressures. I assume from your reaction, some of you already called on. Again, this was not the point. But if you do work 8 hours a day digging ditches, for those of you that never heard me say it, I gave, even though I'm not a psychologist and I'm not anything, I gave a free psychological, not even a treatment. I gave a cure, except at any rate, years ago. That is, there is a cure. Not a treatment. There is a cure, except people won't stand for it. There is a cure for psychological problems. Is run till you can't think. Or change jobs. Get a job digging ditches, and it will stop it. The extended version I originally gave was it came up, for those of you that seem to like this. I also point out that people who, for instance, there is a connection, this time I'll admit it in advance, people who believe, people who are called by God to minister to their fellow man, for instance. People who sincerely, as far as they can do it, and they're accepted as sane, which tells you something about the collective of humanity, but the people who say that they are in direct communion with God, which is not just itinerant preachers out with tents and a truckload full of sawdust. They're people in fine churches, part of the established religious community, that every Sunday or Saturday or Tuesday, whenever they meet, will say things like, well, I was in prayer and meditation and God said so and so. Of course, there are more extreme examples of those who say that God continually speaks to them. If they want to be cured of that, which they don't, no, unless they can no longer make a living and would like to be rid of it, it's simple. If they get out every day and run long enough, if they go join a gym, or if they go out and turn in their collar for a few months and go out and actually dig ditches, God will quit talking to them. I'm assuming you get the humor, because those to whom God talks, those who ordinarily believe it, they don't want to stop. And so it wouldn't have proved anything, but they would not like it. But also, since some of you got it, people with psychological problems, they don't need medication. Of course, none of this is going to work. I'm just talking to you guys in private. Medication is not necessary. Analysis is not necessary. Dig ditches. Dig ditches, and it won't take long. All of your psychological problems will go away, except people who have psychological problems. If I got somebody carried away, if in some way I could put a spell on them, or I so charmed them with my great charisma that they took my word for it and went, well, by God, I'll try it. All my life I've had psychological problems. If it's an ordinary person and they go out and do it, well, I'm assuming you're laughing already. You do know, let's say within 2 weeks, outside, their psychological problems will be gone. 2.5 weeks at the outside, they'll be sick of their condition, they'll quit their job and go back home so that the problems come back. Figuratively speaking, I'm sorry, but that's a fact. They can be cured. You can stop God talking to you. You can stop hearing voices. You can stop communicating with your dead grandmother. Plus, you can stop all psychological problems, in case you see any connection between the list, by no more than 2 weeks worth of ditch digging, 5 days a week. But as I said, ordinary people, after that 2 weeks, if I'm giving an exact prescription, which is not exact, but let's say after 2 weeks, on the 15th day, people with psychological problems would get up and go, my God, he was right. They're gone. I don't even feel them. That's the 15th day. So they go to work the 15th day digging ditches. The ordinary person that I have cured now, who followed my regimen, I will give them at the outside 18 days, and they will have quit. For some reason, like the 18th day, it just suddenly strikes them. They wake up 7 in the morning. The guy gets out. They're just barely getting used to physically the labor. And here it is, the 18th day. They've been cured of their psychological problems 3 days. And somehow, for some reason, it just seems like, I just can't do this anymore. And they roll back over and go to sleep, and that's the end of 2 things. Their career as a ditch digger, and their time relieved of psychological problems.
Yeah.
Ordinary people, to put it very crudely so we can go on, and don't look anywhere else, look to thyself. Ordinary people are so enamored of their ills that talk of cure is just specious. That which could be a cure at best becomes a treatment, such as my little scenario I just made up. They could, after it was over, somebody could say, did you ever hear that guy that claims that you could cure all psychological problems by digging ditches? And this guy tells his buddy, yeah, not only I hear about it, I tried it once. And his buddy says, are you serious? And he went, yeah, about a year ago. And he said, well, did it work? And he'd go, well, now here's what's surprising. I did it for, I don't know, a couple of weeks. And by God, I was feeling better, but it was like, I don't know, it wasn't permanent. The part he left out is he got cured and he quit. So sure, it didn't work out. They did seem to, it seemed to be working. They actually diminished. They were really, I felt better and better, but I don't know, after a few weeks, you know how things are, they just kind of wore off. Neglecting to say, I quit doing it. At any rate, based upon what I'm still talking about tonight in general, again, bypassing the physical aspect of man, that if you're not genetically disabled in some way and lame and crippled, if you're just an ordinary person, and you're ordinarily sane, then you should not be doing anything on a constant basis that is detrimental to your health. So we're assuming that that's just a reasonable foundation. You don't have to be Superman. Everybody's going to die. Look at it that way. But if you're just operationally, normally, physically sane, then that's that. Then intellectually, then mentally, people look at themselves, if they can get past the ordinary conceptions of what, as I said, mental illness are, psychological problems are, stress amounts to, then you can move them from that basis of, give up the body. You're not going to be able to run yourself into some form of enlightenment. You're not going to be able to do exercises to such a point that you will become awakened. You just can't. And you can't fast yourself into some sort of higher state of consciousness, nor can you stuff yourself into it. So just look after the body and forget it. That's that. It's worth that much. So let's assume that you're that far. Speaking of you generically. You can then lead a person. They go, all right, I got that. There's no doubt about that. That's true. What can I do now? The next thing that has happened historically, and it happens individually, and it is still an individual man's attempt to move forward, is still limited to this constructure, or this structure, is then you can say, all right, what's the next point that we should consider about man? Now, people want to say their feelings, and they may even say it. But if they're speaking to someone who apparently knows something about this, or someone who's presenting themselves as being a spiritual teacher or a mystical teacher of some kind, they will say, no, I know what you mean about not feeling good, and etc., but wait a minute. We got to deal with the mind, a man's thought processes. And everything, it fits into that, by the way. Let me give you another quick example, using religion again as being a publicly recognized form of mysticism. Take the Western story again, the idea of somebody going to the mystic Jesus and saying, hey, how come I'm not more enlightened? How come I'm not a true Christian? How come I'm not better? I've been trying to follow your teaching. I've been hearing about it now for a few years, and I've been trying to follow it, such as, and the following even of your predecessors, the Judaic prophets, the Israeli prophets. I have succeeded that I no longer exercise aggression toward my fellow man. I've kept the main commandments. I do not kill. I do not aggress. I do not express hostility to my fellow man. And supposedly Jesus says, in other words, that's the body. That's the physical behavior. And Jesus says, okay. The guy says, I've done it, but I'm still not enlightened. I don't feel it much different. Jesus said, good. The next step is, you can't just quit killing people. You can't just go by the, as they normally call it, the letter of the law for the commandments, which means behavior. You cannot just cease. You cannot just not kill people. You have got to stop wanting to kill people. It's not enough that you refrain from committing adultery with your neighbor's wife. You have to stop wanting to. It's not enough that you refrain from stealing and taking that which is not yours. But you must stop wanting to. See, that goes from behavior, the physical side of life, to the mental. And the man, all he could do is walk away or say, well, I see what you mean. It gives me something new to go on. Because he was expressing a perfectly well-sounded expression of those who attempt to do something extraordinary, whether it be under religious guise or more directly under some would-be mystical auspices, is that they spend a while, because it takes a man a good while to even get to the point to be able to, with some validity, say, well, I can now refrain from, and then list a litany of evils that are forbidden, that everyone assumes are forbidden. I do not kill people. I do not steal from other people. I do not try to take my neighbor's wife. But I do not take that which is not mine, is what they all amount to, if you remember. That's what all the commandments always, I do not take that which is not mine. Of course, one thing about that, if all you got to do is reach a certain age of hormonal deterioration, is why we've been through that, but I'll let it go. That is, you can become, it's a lot easier to be a Christian if you've been trying to be one, or to be a Jew, or to be a Muslim. It's a lot easier at the age of 50 than it is at the age of 20. And to say much easier is the grandest of understatements. But at any rate, everyone can understand because they go through that progress, but it can apparently take a large part of one's life. Giving it a sincere effort to get to the place to meet the letter of the law. That is, that you can refrain from that list of do nots. Now, it takes a while. It takes a while for a man to be able to genuinely go to a Jesus or a Buddha or a Muhammad or a Moses and say, I can now, or I no longer, or I can refrain now from physically doing the following. I do not kill, I do not steal, and then be told, well, good. That is progress. And the person says, okay, now what? I have not achieved that, even though I can't define it, but I have not achieved that for which I undertook this kind of struggle. And so a Muhammad or a Confucius or a Lo says, all right, now you must be able to refrain from wanting to, which means you've got to now refrain from thinking about doing it. And if they can hear that, they go, thank you, and walk off. And that should take care of the rest of their lifetime. They're trying to deal with that. Well, it should. As convoluted as this may have appeared, now we're back to this. That is still not what every sane person, most sane people, and most people who undertake such a quest as this kind of activity represents, that is not what they ask about. They will first, they want to ask about the body. Everybody, they'll go through that. And if somebody found that Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha, oh, I've been looking for you and I finally found you. What's the first thing I should do about the way I look, the way I've been living, the way I act? It's easy. It's obvious. You can't help it. It's not stupidity. It's not naivete. It's just that's the first thing that people think. Well, I've got to do something about my body, my physical life. So what should I do? Assuming they can hear very quickly that somebody who would know tells them, are you doing anything to harm yourself? Which most people are doing to varying degrees. But he says, well, don't do that. You know what they are. Don't do that. Stop it and come back tomorrow and ask me. Give you 24 hours, realize it and come back. Of course, if it's any good, he'd go, oh, well, I got it now. So they'd continue. And he'd say, well, what's next? Then what he wants to say, what he wants to ask about is, all right, you're right. Maybe I should make it a little cruder. A guy goes to a Buddha or Muhammad and he says, I want to undertake the mystical quest. So he says, okay. He says, maybe Muhammad, Buddha, whoever. The guy says, all right, what's your question? What do you want to know? I understand you believe you got the interest and the itch, the hunger. All right, what do you want me to tell you? What is it you want from me? The guy goes, all right, I get more than one question. He says, yeah, tell me what it is you want. So the guy goes, well, how do I quit from staggering around and hurting myself? And he goes, well, maybe cut down the drinking. And the guy goes, damn, I didn't think about that. And he can say, well, how can I quit spitting up blood? It hurts me in the morning. He says, well, you could cut out smoking. He goes, damn, let me write this down. So one or two of those, and finally the mystic would have to say, well, you see where this is going, don't you? It's stop anything that's hurting you physically. And the guy goes, oh, well, and tears up the note. Yeah, I got it. You're right. All right. So then the mystic says, well, what's the next question? So the guy, what he wants to ask is, well, how do I stop feeling bad? And he most likely would say, well, all right, I got that. He said, but how is it? I don't know. I've kind of been depressed, or I've always been kind of aggressive. I feel generally pissed off a lot in life. Or you might say it seems to swing back and forth. The old classic is, sometimes I just feel pissed off. I just hate everybody, and then the next day, I feel like everybody hates me, and I just feel so depressed. I'm even afraid to get out of bed. I just want to hide. I'm a grown, strong person. I'm a grown man or woman. That's what they want to ask, and they might ask it that way. But here's the way it ends up. And this is not the fault of the person asking. It's not the fault of the mystic. It's the limitations of the way the mind works up to a certain point of consciousness. If the mystic understood something, whoever it is, me saying a Buddha or a Lao or Zoroaster, he knows he cannot tell him directly about emotions for a very good reason. But he would have to say, well, tell me more what you mean. Tell me what you think about when you have this kind of aggression. It is here, of course, also, this is a sidebar, but this is how the whole idea, as far back as the Greeks in the Western world, up to what appeared to be the new discovery of Western analysis, Papa Freud and etc., of talking about your problems, that in some way we will analyze them. That's not the point. I slipped it in on you a couple of nights ago. One guy said he'd come to the conclusion that all psychological problems could be cured with or without professional help if a person talked about them long enough. Mm-hmm. Anybody remember that? A few of you went, huh, that's it. The idea of there being some specific form, some specific paradigm, or some schedule, some model that they've had to develop and work out, and are still, of course, working on. That's why we have evolving schools of psychiatric thought, that the certain kind of analysis. Should the analysor actually engage in dialogue with the analysee? Should the doctor actually engage in repartee, actual direct talk? Should he respond to what the patient says, or just go, just encourage him to keep talking? And then for a while they believe that, and then, well, nah, my God, you ought to get in there in the trenches and talk to them. Pull it out of them. Also, I pointed out, not an attack on psychiatry any more than religion, but I pointed out that psychiatry does not work. But then you got to remember, nothing works in the sense that its stated goals are never realized. Because if they were, it would be suicidal. In the same way that the stated goals of religion are penology, criminal rehabilitation, religion, psychiatry, it doesn't work. That is, they state their aim. Take their aim. I'm not saying what their aim is. You ask psychiatry what their aim is, and then you ask them, say, well, do you succeed at that? And they go, as a general rule. I say, oh, I accept that. And they go, no. But that's no secret. They do not succeed. And yet you ask somebody that's in analysis, and you say, well, you know, I've thought about doing it. I've always been interested in that. I don't know anything about it. How long have you been in analysis? And the guy goes, 22 years now. And you go, well, are you cured? I mean, are you still going? Oh, no. But you wait for them to, you know, really begin to rail at psychiatry, and you go, well, are you upset? And they go, what do you mean upset? In other words, they've had 22 years of failure, and yet they smile about it. They speak proudly of it. And in fact, finally excuse themselves because I'm late for my appointment. Here's the point. They're not cured. But they find no fault with it. Because if you ask them, if somebody had indeed been in there 22 years, they do feel better. They're not cured, but they feel better. If they had talked by themselves in a room for 22 years, they would have felt better. Or as I had the man present to you, his supposition, his suspicion now is that if you talk long enough, you should also throw in, if you live long enough to talk long enough. No, that's a fact. If you could live long enough to talk long enough, all psychological problems would be cured. All right. Beyond the laugh production, that is a fact. Now, it's not going to happen to ordinary people for the same kind of reasons I've already explained tonight. It's not supposed to, and they're not going to. If it began to work too much, they'd stop doing it. But that's a fact. Now the question is, well, what would be at work? Why does even an analysis at the ordinary level seem to have some salubrious effect? Why do people find favor with it? Why does somebody go and study and spend large amounts of money on education, but study for 14, 16 years into the profession? Just to make an ass of themselves? Just to be involved with something that's an abject failure? It has an effect. But here's the question that I'm presenting to you tonight, having nothing to do with psychiatry. Why does it seem to work? Or I'm telling you more so, that if you talk long enough, if you could live long enough, there's a certain kind of mathematical imperative and justice involved with that. Some of you laughed, and here's why you laughed. Because you, even though you didn't analyze it, you were suspecting that you can't live long enough. No. And your suspicion was not ill-founded. No. But if you could live long enough to talk long enough, to anybody, even to your dog, your cat, doesn't have to be a professional, but if you could live long enough to talk long enough, the same way that people do in psychiatric analysis, talking analysis, if you could do it, what you call psychological problems would be gone. You would get up one day. It might take you, 120 years, whereas you could have done it 2 weeks by my method, the shortcut of digging ditches. But after maybe 120 years, one day you'd wake up and something would be strange. It'd take you a while to put your finger on it, and you'd suddenly, sometime, maybe that day before the sun went down, you'd go, my God, I'm cured. What happened? Why does talking about psychological problems, which I told you are not mental, they're emotional. Why does that work? There is a principality hard to define, normally unknown, between two kingdoms, one in the mountains and one down in the valley, that apparently stay, at least in some low-level degree of conflict, and between whom communications appears to range between scant and non-existent. All right, I'll be more blunt. If the general complaints that men have, at the ordinary level, that of psychological problems, and even at the apparently level a bit extended into people who believe they're involved in the mystical quest, their complaints are, the base of their complaints is what appears to be psychological or emotional. there is a relationship between that and the mind that is so overlapping, that is so indistinct, that it has given rise to the idea that there's secrets going on in the world, that there are conspiracies, that things going on, and an ordinary person could even accuse me of displaying it or referring to it or maybe being a part of it. That there's not only religion going on, there's not only all these publicly known forms of apparent mysticism, Zen and yoga and Sufism and all the mystical aspects of all the major religions, yet people like me they assume are inferring that, hey, that's not the real thing, there's something else. What the hell is it, and why is that going on? It's going on because it is secret, but for one reason. It can't be talked about. But they think, well, there's a specific reason it can't be talked about. It is a willful act on someone's part. It's a willful act in the same way that people say, I feel tense, I have emotional problems, what can I do? Yeah. And all you can do is go, well, look over there, go dig ditches. They're going, what the hell does that have to do with it? Or if they were not a believer in common views of psychiatric treatments, you could say, well, come pay me $100 every time you show up here and lay down on your back or sit up there, at any rate, and talk to me about your problems. Oh, and you'll explain them to me. No, you just talk to me. Wait a minute. I travel to where your office is, and I pay you $100, and I sit there and I talk to you, and you don't do anything. I mean, you listen to me. Yes. That's about as intriguing if you had no belief, if you're not wired up to have any faith in that. That strikes one as valid as me saying, we'll go out and dig ditches. 2 weeks outside, you'll be cured. Yeah, right. The idea that there's a secret is the whole thing is that the heart of what seems to be humanity's problems cannot be directly addressed. And I'm telling you what it is. It's emotions. And when people even attempt, when ordinary people attempt to get into exposés of secrets, and somebody's always doing that. Now somebody comes out with a new book all the time that they worm their way into the Masons. And they'll write a book. You know, the Masons go out and do things publicly. They have buildings that say, you know, the Masons. They go out and ride around their scooters and parades, and they give money to children's hospitals. And yet people always go, there's something going on there. You have to be invited, it's secret, and they have all kinds of rituals. And somebody worms their way in or says they do, and they write an expose. They spent 20 years, they say, in a sham, having to go through all kinds of efforts to finally get involved, to get invited. And then they became a member. And then they had to stay there for 10 years to learn all the secrets. And then they finally got them all. And they threw off the sham life and came out and wrote this book exposing all. This goes on constantly. I'm just using one example. Except the thing is, you read the expose and it reveals nothing. I mean, they say, well, they get together and you must wear a blindfold and they only do it at midnight and you have to learn a secret handshake and, you know, you do all this and you read it and they say, that's it. And your thing is, you pay $29.95 for this book and they say, that's it. And you get to read it and you think, that's it? The expose of all the world's great secret efforts, the great secret conspiracies, all the great secret, the idea of secret work, that is, what I'm saying, that the recognized forms of the mystical effort is not it. And people go, well, what is it? And somebody's always going in trying to find some Sufi monastery hidden up in the hills of Afghanistan, and many times coming back saying that they actually got in there, and they come back and they expose the secrets. And you read it and you go, well, if that's the secrets, okay, but you know, what the hell? So what? It's the revelation of secrets that mean nothing. And so then you're left with, wait a minute, if that is a revealing of that secret, then the secret doesn't amount to anything. Yes. It's because the whole idea that you think it's secret is your mind says, well, I can look at the body, I can quit eating so much, I can quit taking drugs, I can do that, then I can quit. I can quit gossiping, I can quit telling people I hate them, I can seem to bring this under some control. And yet something's still missing. There's a secret somewhere. Yes. It's a mid-municipality, or principality, I should say. It's emotions. And man, thus far, there is no way to directly talk about it. There's no direct way to tell somebody what to do about emotions. They just say, God, I feel bad. They whine, they complain. And the obvious thing to tell them, from the sense of me using the idea of a warrior as a metaphor for someone involved with this, is that a warrior turns around to people and says, "Oh, I feel horrible. I feel, what can I do about feeling so bad?" First thing is, shut up. That can sound crude. If you're wired up to be a undercover, militaristically inclined little grown-up boy, you can go, I like that. I like the idea of being a stalwart, real little trooper. No, that's not it. But it strikes people. That's why I can get people to laugh, even a generally randomly attracted audience. I can make things bring about whining and complaining and criticism and say, well, the cure for all that, the way to is just shut the hell up. And many people go, ah! They don't know why. It is direct. One of the few times they heard a direct assault, not in a negative sense, but a direct touching of emotion. Not me touching it, but me addressing the idea of emotion. I feel so bad. If you'd shut up, you wouldn't feel so bad. Well, yeah, but you don't know how bad I feel. Well, shut up. Well, that ain't going to do any good. And so there you are. And they're right. Because they never try it. Do y'all get on?